Recognition. At the end of the day, Edgar stood panting beside the obsidian stele, gazing at the names of his family. The stele now rested upon a low pedestal of fresh, dark soil. Soil the plants had created in record time. "You did it," he said proudly to Alyssa, Lirea, and Thalia. "You woke him without breaking him." In that moment, it became clear. Tirathos would not take generations to become habitable. With the energy of the deep and the power of the sisters, this planet would become the greatest jewel in the sector, faster than the Academy scholars had ever thought possible. The cornerstone for the first permanent settlement had been laid. And at the helm of this new world stood 3 young women who had once possessed nothing but their own lives, and who now gave the gift of breath to an entire world. The discovery of the tracks sparked an electric tension that, for a moment, pushed the triumph of the terraforming into the background. In the thinning, brown dust-laden air, the prints appeared almost surreal, too small for an adult, too delicate for the bulky boots of the Academy technicians. The track in the dust. Edgar knelt down and brushed a gloved hand over one of the prints near the obsidian stele. The form, 5 toes were discernible, yet the pads appeared more elastic, almost like those of a creature specialized in finding purchase on smooth metal surfaces. The direction. The trail led away from the brightly lit habitats, winding into the labyrinth of steel girders and platforms that jutted into the sky like petrified skeletons. "Stay alert," Edgar whispered, resting his hand on the hilt of his tool knife. Alyssa and Lirea followed him in silence, their respirators emitting soft, rhythmic sounds. The iron labyrinth. The path led them deeper into an industrial zone that had seen no light for millennia. Up here, high above the gardens of the depths, Tirathos was a world of cold steel. The tracks wound deftly around twisted girders and leaped across gaping chasms in the metal floors. Finally, they reached the massive foundation of a colossal tower. There, half hidden behind a tangle of rusty cables, stood a heavy steel door. It differed from the others. The dust around the handle had been wiped away, and scattered on the ground lay tiny, dried remnants of leaves from the lower gardens. The encounter at the door. Edgar gave a signal. Alyssa and Lirea flanked him. With a powerful heave that made the metal groan, the door swung open. Behind it lay no storeroom. It was a kind of small, improvised shrine. Drawings hung on the walls, sketched directly onto the metal using colored oxide dust. They depicted the dust eater, plants, the stele, and, what made the 3 sisters catch their breath, 3 stylized female figures with glowing eyes. In the back corner of the room, something stirred. 3 small figures, barely a meter tall, crouched there. Their skin was silvery-gray, almost like brushed steel, and their eyes were large and amber-colored. They wore simple cloaks woven from the fibers of the deep-dwelling plants. "The children of the Tirantii," Lirea breathed. The hairs of silence. They were not holograms. They were physical beings who had evidently survived in the inaccessible intermediate levels. When they saw Edgar and the girls, they did not recoil. The smallest of the figures stepped forward, holding up a handful of the brown dust that was drifting in through the open door. Then she pointed to a small, stunted plant in a metal container, one that had nearly withered away. They tried to heal the planet, Edgar realized. Throughout all the eons, they brought fragments of the gardens up to the surface in an attempt to save it. But they lacked our technology, and the breath of the Tirantii. The small beings looked up at Alyssa and Lirea. There was no fear in their gaze, but rather a deep, almost painful anticipation. They had been watching for the arrival of the rightful owners. They had watched as the first tent cleared the air. The new alliance. Lirea knelt down and opened her sample capsule. She drew out a fresh sapling and handed it to the small figure. as the silvery fingers touched the living green. A tremor ran through the small body. In that moment, the terraforming of Tirathos became more than just an ecological project. It became a rescue mission for a forgotten species. The stele outside no longer bore merely the names of the clan. It had become a beacon for the indigenous inhabitants who, in their hiding places, had awaited the return of life. The scene within the dusty steel shrine was filled with an almost sacred silence, broken only by the soft hiss of oxygen, as the pure gas filled the lungs of the small beings. A medical miracle occurred. The silvery-gray coloration of their skin, which had served as a protective layer against the planet's toxins, gave way to a healthy, vibrant complexion. The transformation. The three figures straightened up. The trembling in their limbs vanished, and their features grew soft and childlike. It was as if the oxygen had ended a hibernation spanning millennia. "They are not children of steel," whispered Edgar, watching in stunned disbelief. "They are the children of those who once extinguished the light of the Tirantii. They merely adapted to the darkness in order to survive." Suddenly, the lips of the smallest child began to tremble. It looked up at Alyssa with large, amber-colored eyes that now shone with clarity and alertness. A voice, thin as a silver thread, yet astonishingly clear, reached their ears. "Guardian, the blue returns. We have waited until the breath tastes sweet again." The other two children nodded vigorously. They were not speaking in a foreign tongue, but in an archaic dialect that the blood of the Tirantii had preserved within them. Their gazes wandered reverently toward Lirea, and finally toward Edgar, whom they regarded with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "The riddle of isolation. Why didn't you come to the habitats?" Lirea asked gently, kneeling down beside them. "We have warmth and clean air for everyone there." The eldest of the children pointed to the steel door, and then to the distant glow of the academy stations. "The light there is loud," it answered with a child's logic. "It smells of strangers. We knew only the writing on the stone. The names Edgar left there. They called to us. We knew that only those who carve their names into the obsidian are the true owners of the breath." Edgar understood. The stele had not merely been a boundary marker, but a beacon of trust. These children had watched from the shadows as the clan honored its dead and sowed the seeds of life. The call for the healers. "Alyssa, establish contact with the ship," Edgar ordered, placing his hand protectively on the shoulder of one of the children. "We need Zara, Hester, and Lia. Immediately. They must prepare an isolated station. No academy tech, nothing loud. Just soft light, plants, and pure oxygen. These children are the most precious legacy of Tirathos." Alyssa nodded and activated her comm link. "Breath of the Tirantii. This is Alyssa. We have made contact with the indigenous people. 3 survivors. Physical condition unstable, but responsive. Prepare the medical suite. And inform Zara. We are bringing the planet's future on board." The first bridge. While they waited for the team to arrive, something touching occurred. The smallest child stepped toward Edgar and gently touched the rough surface of his environmental suit. Then, reaching into a pocket, the child pulled out a small, translucent crystal that pulsed with a soft blue glow in the pale beam of their flashlights. It was a control crystal for the deeper mechanical levels. "For the builder," the child said, placing the crystal into Edgar's large hand. In that moment, Edgar knew that the mission of the 3 sisters had reached an entirely new dimension. They no longer possessed merely the soil and the plants. They had won the hearts of those who had never given up on this planet. The era of solitude on Tirathos was finally over. The news from Zara triggered a wave of relief almost as palpable as the fresh oxygen inside the hummingbird. The fact that the children were physically unharmed bordered on a miracle. Yet the decision regarding their future weighed heavily upon them. Hester arrived aboard her hummingbird asterisk, accompanied by Lia and Zara. Also on board were Natasha, Isla, and Lirea. Hester and Lia sought out a landing site near the breath, so they could disembark. When they reached the stele, the three children looked at them with deep concern. Isla had the right idea. She pointed to herself, then to the inscription on the stele that bore her name. She then pointed to the others in the same manner. The tension among the children began to dissipate. They brought the children aboard the hummingbird asterisk, and Zara, together with Hester and Lia, set about examining them. After an hour or two, the results were conclusive. Edgar, Alyssa, and Isla, their lungs are flawless, they are normally developed, healthy, and carry no pathogens whatsoever. They lack absolutely nothing. What do you think about taking them to Thalzar? Or perhaps we could reinforce one of the habitats so it could serve as living quarters for them. The council of the clan convened. Edgar gazed down through the hummingbird's viewport at the desolate, brown surface of Tirathos, where the obsidian stele stood like a solitary sentinel. Then he looked over at the children, who, now surrounded by Isla, Natasha, and Lirea, were visibly beginning to thaw. Taking them to Thalzar would be the surest way to safeguard their health, Edgar began slowly. There, we have the warmth, the community, and the full protection of the clan. But, he paused and looked at Lirea. Lirea nodded, as if she had read his thoughts. But they are the soul of this planet. If we take them away now, we sever the last living link to the Tirantii. They have waited here, in the darkness and the dust. They belong to Tirathos, just like the plants. A new home, the refuge of hope. After a brief, intense discussion, the decision was made. They would not take the children away, but rather create a place for them that befitted their significance. Reinforcements. One of the larger habitats, situated directly above one of the access points to the deep gardens, was immediately repurposed. It was outfitted with additional radiation shielding and a triple redundant filtration system. The design, Isla and Lirea immediately set about making the interior feel like a home. They brought in soft furs from Thalzar, light crystals that radiated a warm, sun-yellow glow, and, naturally, many of the new plants from Lirea. Integration. The habitat was not to be a research station, but a home. There, the children were to have the freedom to move between the surface, within their protected dome, and the ancient corridors of the deep. A surprising reaction. When the children learned that they were allowed to stay, and that a house of light was being built for them, something unexpected occurred. The eldest child took Isla's hand and led her to a wall of the new habitat. With a finger, the child began tracing lines in the air, lines that called to mind the complex schematics of the Tirantii. "We will show you," the child whispered. "We will show you how to make the stone speak. The metal is not dead. It is merely sleeping deeply." Zara watched the scene, fascinated. Edgar. These children are not merely survivors. They are the living databases of this planet. What they know, through intuition and oral tradition, the Academy would not be able to decipher in 100 years. The Guardians of Tirathos. While Hester and Lia ensured that medical monitoring was in place, one thing became clear: the clan had gained new members. The three children of Tirathos were placed under the protection of the mistresses. Alyssa promised them that they would never have to go hungry in the darkness again. As the sun of Tirathos, a pale, distant speck, set, the new habitat lit up like a star against the dark metal surface. Edgar stood outside by the stele once more, touching the silver letters. He knew now. The list of names on the obsidian would soon have to be expanded. Tonight, the history of Tirathos was being rewritten, not merely by humans, but by those who had never given up on the planet. The silence that remained on Tirathos after the ships had lifted off was unlike the silence of the aeons past. It was no longer empty. Inside the solitary, brightly lit habitat, the three children sat huddled close together, surrounded by the strange, soft furs of Thalzar and the scent of the new plants. The guardians of the first night. Outside reigned the pitch-black night of the planet, a darkness so dense that one could not see a hand held right before one's eyes. Yet the habitat glowed like a small star amidst this infinity. The rejection of the snacks. They had drunk the water greedily. It was pure and fresh. A stark contrast to the damp distillates of the deep. But the Academy's snacks were alien to them. Their metabolisms were still attuned to the sparse, mineral-rich lichens and roots of the underworld. Gazing at the stars, they stood at the dome's window, watching the 2 points of light, the agile hummingbird and the majestic breath of the Tirantii, as they grew smaller, until they became one with the distant stars. Reflected in their amber eyes, for the first time in their lives, was not the fear of being forgotten, but the certainty of a promise fulfilled. A new rhythm. In the depths of the habitat, the eldest child began to examine the walls. It touched the smooth surfaces of the modern technology with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The promise. Edgar's words echoed within them. Tomorrow. A concept that, for a long time, had meant nothing to them but a mere repetition of the darkness. Now. It signified the return of the giants, the return of the breath and of those whose names they now knew by heart. Light in the darkness. While the planet outside groaned beneath the colossal storms of the metal desert, the light within the habitat remained steady. It was a signal to the planet itself, we are here. We stay. The sleep of the just. Eventually, exhaustion triumphed over curiosity. The children curled up on the warm blankets. The soft hum of the ventilation system, pumping fresh oxygen into the room, felt like a lullaby. That night, perhaps for the very first time, they did not dream of dusty corridors and fading light, but rather of the blue that Alyssa had promised, and of the silver vines on the sleeves of the women they called their mistresses. Tomorrow, a new day would dawn on Tirathos. And when the ships reappeared on the horizon, these children would be ready to share their secrets, the paths to the ancient machines, and the codes stored deep within their blood. The clan had found its ambassadors, and Tirathos had its children back.